Hey everybody, my name is Spaz, and I'm a CD junkie. On this episode of CD Junkie, I'm going to talk about a band that we all love, but yet they don't get enough love. Yes, I'm talking about 10cc, one of Britain's finest, greatest, most creative bands. We all know them for the hits I'm Not in Love, Things We Do for Love, but they have quite a career. Four talented chaps. I always like to start these episodes off and talk about how I got into the band, and that is basically with the single I'm Not in Love in 1975. Huge hit. Of course, I fell in love with it. Very McCartney-esque. Eric Stewart's vocal in that. I was familiar with the albums, because I'd see them in the bins and stuff. But and then I don't think I really got heavily into them until probably Deceptive Bends, which came out in 1977. But let's go back to the beginning. And 10cc, it was four guys, but it was really two pairs. There was Lol Creme and Kevin Godley, and Eric Stewart and Graham Gouldman. And the four coming together, Eric and Graham were just great pop songwriters. Godley and Creme were fantastically strange and creative and odd and wonderful and eclectic, and also great pop songwriters. Bringing all four together, they just challenged themselves in the studio. They were all seasoned musicians by the time they came together. Eric Stewart had been in the Mindbenders, and he's the guy who actually sings Groovy Kind of Love that you've heard a million times over. Also, Graham Gouldman wrote a lot of hits for various British artists, such as For Your Love, Bus Stop, things like that. So these four guys get together, and they have their own studio, and they're working with artists, and they're working with Neil Sedaka during his comeback phase. This is before Laughter in the Rain. They were working with him, and Neil Sedaka told him, you guys really got to form a band. You guys got to be a group. So that's how 10cc were born. And they came out with their first album in 1973. And this is the expanded edition with a few bonus tracks there, as you can tell. 10cc at this time were very eccentric. They mixed 50s rock and roll with this weird, strange sense of humor. They had great songwriting, great vocals, but they were all over the map. They were fantastic, and they were creative, and they were doing things that really nobody else was doing at the time. And that is their first album. That was 1973. 74 rolls around, and they're toughening up a little bit, going a little bit rockier. This is Sheet Music, came out in 1974. But this is really when they started stretching out and becoming more of a rock band, as opposed to that homage to the 50s, from the first album, like Donna and Rubber Bullets and stuff. But this was really a huge step forward. But then in 1975, they took an even huger step in a weird direction. They put out the original soundtrack. This album is hard to describe. Well, the one way to describe it is it has I'm Not in Love on it. But I'm Not in Love is kind of like the only song that's like that on the album. But it is, it's also got Life is a Minestrone and One Night in Paris, and just, it's really a stellar album, but you can't see any tracks there. I apologize for that. But very unique album. It's not prog, but it has prog tendencies, which means it stretches out beyond the normal rock and roll formula, and it's really unique, refreshing. Even today, it sounds like nothing else. And of course, I'm Not in Love. Just that song just melts my heart every time I hear it. Then out comes How Dare You. This came out in 1976. And again, no tracks listed on the back there. I apologize. But these do have like a bonus track or two. This was them maybe not being quite as strange as they were on the original soundtrack, but still fantastic. Just some amazing songs on this. It seemed like, gosh, I can't wait to see what the next album sounds like. Well, guess what? they split. Godley and Cream went off and they did their own thing, and everybody knows. I mean, Godley and Cream put out a lot of great records, and they did, they ended up directing videos and all that kind of stuff. They became legends on their own. Well, Eric Stewart and Graham Gouldman continued as 10cc, and out comes Deceptive Bends, their most insanely amazing pop album to date. There they are there. There's Eric and Graham right there. This is the album with The Things We Do for Love. It's also got Good Morning Judge, People in Love, and it's got this amazing song called Feel the Benefit, which is like 3 great songs just strung together. I guess you can say it's sort of their Abbey Road moment, but this is a fantastic pop record. Still very creative, very different, very unique. And then they follow that up. They put a band together and went out on the road, and they put out this, I don't know if you want to call it Live and Let Live, or Live and Let Live, or Live and Let Live, whatever you want to call it. It was a 2-record album, and live, and there's track listing there. And 1978 brought us Bloody Tourists. Now this was almost, I kind of want to say, a step sideways, maybe just a half a step back, because it's a great pop record, because it has From Rochdale to Ocho Rios, and it's got Dreadlock Holiday, and it's got Take These Chains, lots of great songs, but it wasn't as adventurous as the previous releases. Still recommended, but I still say if you're looking for pop, you're going to want to go for Deceptive Bends, but still a fantastic album, Bloody Tourists. Look Here followed in 1980, and this was kind of along the same lines as Bloody Tourists, maybe not as good. This is the disc. This is the one with bonus tracks. It's a very good record. I don't recommend it as much as anything else. The U.S. cover looked different than that, but otherwise same tracks. 1981 comes around, and most of the band left. They're still working with guitarist Rick Fenn. Drummer Paul Burgess might be on the record. I didn't double check. But this right here, in my opinion, is the best album since Deceptive Bends. It's so full of great pop tracks. Melodic, clever, great lyrics, great melodies, great harmonies. This is the bonus track edition. Look at all that bonus stuff. Interesting thing about this. This album came out in the UK. When they released it in the US, they took off a few songs and they added some new songs. Those new songs were actually Eric Stewart, Graham Gouldman, and Andrew Gold. And Andrew Gold had worked with them on a couple tracks. One of them called Runaway, which kind of had that same sort of haunting choir vocals in the background, like I'm Not in Love, trying to capture that feeling. And it does. It has a really, really nice feeling to it. This is a very quirky album. All this time, Graham and Eric had been sharing lead vocal duties. Then in 1983, Windows in the Jungle. This album is really good. The only problem I've ever had with it is the fact that on the album itself, Eric Stewart handles all the lead vocals, and Graham Gouldman did not handle any lead vocals. You can hear him doing the backups and the call and response type things, but he didn't do any lead vocals. Graham Gouldman, underrated vocalist. But still, you got Eric Stewart, so you can't go wrong with that. The album is more dense, more produced, less fun, but it's still filled with great songs like Feel the Love and 24 Hours and Food for Thought. And then this, of course, has bonus tracks there. And that was it for quite a long time. A compilation had come out, and the record label sort of inspired the band to get back together and work together, and because all 4 of them were on speaking terms again. So out comes Meanwhile. This is the album where all 4 of them were supposed to be working together. Well, unfortunately and fortunately, it was just back to Stewart and Gouldman. And Kevin Godley sang lead on one song and backing vocals on a couple others. Lol Cream only sang backing vocals on some songs. And I know that Kevin Godley came to the studio and did his vocal after the instrumentation had been recorded, but I don't even know if Lol Cream entered the studio. He probably did his vocals in a separate studio. But this album, okay, look, it's produced by Gary Katz, and it's got some of the top session men like Jeff Porcaro from Toto and people like that. So it's a very regimented album. It's not as eclectic or creative as 10cc normally are, because they're being produced by Gary Katz, who worked with Steely Dan and everything. So the album itself has some great songs on it. There's a song on here called Don't Break the Promises, which is co-written by Paul McCartney. Now, another problem with this, in my opinion, is the fact that Graham Gouldman does not do any lead vocals at all. Sometimes you can't even hear him in the background vocals. And he does sing lead vocals on one of the B-sides. The 3 B-sides from the album are here, as well as the single edits. So this is recommended. Any 10cc is recommended, but if you want the fun stuff, this isn't as fun. It isn't as successful as if all 4 of them had really gotten back together, but it's still worth your time. Right before I did this video, when I went to grab the other CDs, I couldn't find my copy of the 1995 album, Mirror, Mirror. But I'm going to tell you about it anyway. Now, on this album, neither member worked together. Eric Stewart did stuff in his studio. Graham Gouldman did stuff in his studio. And they threw it together. And they took those songs and they put them together and made a 10cc album. The only link is a musician by the name of Adrian Lee, who worked with both artists. The version that came out in America had fewer songs, but the version that came out in the UK had 14 tracks. And one of them is called Yvonne's the One, which was co-written by Paul McCartney, and he plays on it. And there's another song on it called Code of Silence, which McCartney plays on, but he didn't co-write. And oddly enough, Andrew Gold is back in 10cc for one track, and he sings lead on it. Now, the song's called Ready to Go Home, which is fantastic, so I'm not going to complain. But that's basically it with 10cc. After Mirror, Mirror, bye-bye. Nothing has happened. I don't even think they're even thinking or talking about getting back together. Now, like I said earlier, God Ain't Cream went off and they did their stuff. They did their albums, which are all marvelous and fantastic and usually kind of odd and weird. Eric Stewart actually had a couple solo albums independent. There was a 2 CD collection that came out a couple years ago called Anthology, which combined the best of those. But I'm not really featuring the solo stuff, but since Graham Gouldman doesn't get enough love, I just thought just real quick, this was a pre-10cc recording where he does some of his own compositions, Bus Stop and No Milk Today and For Your Love and stuff. And then he's had other solo stuff out. This is called And Another Thing, which is a sequel to that album. And also, another thing to point out is between the album Windows in the Jungle and Meanwhile, Graham Gouldman had a pretty successful career with a band called Wax, which is another duo that he was in with Andrew Gold. And here's just the first 2 albums. I'm just going to show those to you. But they put out a lot of great material. Andrew Gold sang most of those tracks. If you want to hear more Graham Gouldman vocals by his solo material, like I said, underrated. But anyway, that's it. I hope you enjoyed my trawl through 10cc's CD catalog. Sorry I let you down by misplacing my Mirror, Mirror CD. I'll probably find it once I post this video. But you know what? Thank you again. And until the next time we meet, my name is Spaz, and I'm a CD junkie.